This week, the Catholic Church talked about transgender. Ow! This week, the Catholic Church. Ow! People are throwing things. Ow! The Catholic Church has come under a lot of fire and a lot of heat this past week because it came out with a document on transgender. And it was a document written to Catholic schools talking about the issues of transgender. And it was talking about things that we've known for, well, forever. Since the beginning of the world, that a boy is a boy, a girl is a girl, male is male, and female is female. You can't change sex or gender. It's what you're born with, and it's not fluid.
Except I'm living, breathing, tangible evidence to the contrary. Not simply being transgender, but gender fluid. Which, by the way, does not mean I can choose my gender. Because, oddly enough, I would agree with you in the fact that gender is not something we as people are capable of controlling. But just because we as a species cannot shift the tectonic plates beneath our feet, that in no way means they're static. So the video we are responding to today is one put up by the YouTube channel Catholic Truth. And it's important to say Catholic Truth so as not to confuse it with, you know, the actual truth. This is the first video in a 3-part series discussing transgender people in relation to the Catholic Church. Do note how I say transgender people, not transgender. This is for the very simple fact that transgender is an adjective, a word which names an attribute of a noun. It is not a noun in itself. Therefore, to end your sentence with said word as if it were a noun is a really good way to reveal just how little Brian Mercier actually knows about the topic. It's also not a verb. I don't transgender every day. I am a transgender person. And nowhere is that fact dependent on this idea that a boy can be a girl or a girl can be a boy. Rather, it's based on an in-depth understanding of the science behind sex and gender, and the fact that a lot of the assumptions made about said things by Christian culture are, as with many aspects of science, completely and utterly wrong. And had Christians not first outlawed trans people in Europe during the Christianization of Rome, had they not attempted to erase the cultural significance of trans people in cultures across the globe via colonial violence, had they not sought to destroy the emerging science on the subject of trans people in Germany via book burnings as part of the rise of the Nazis, said facts likely would have come to light much, much sooner. But sadly, Christianity did do all those things. It did outlaw trans people across the Roman Empire. It did attempt to use colonial violence to erase the cultural significance of trans people globally. It did destroy early research documenting the existence of trans people as part of the Nazi-led book burnings. What you claim we have always known is not a naturally formed nor scientific conclusion. It's the result of historic violence carried out by Christians, including Catholics. And I'm sure we'll have plenty of time to cover this in greater detail throughout the series. Though, I will note this. The sad way you pretend to have things thrown at you at the start is such a clear presentation of how people like you form a Christian persecution complex or narrative. Nobody is throwing anything at Catholics. What you meant by a lot of fire and heat is open criticism. If the Catholic Church were the victim of violence, we'd have burnt your churches to the ground a long time ago for your protection of child rapists. Meanwhile, trans people are routinely being targeted and even murdered for simply existing. So stop trying to paint yourself the victim of an unjust society as people are trying to hold your church accountable for its atrocities.
But political activists came out of the woodworks, and gay activists and fundamentalist activists and all these people attacked the Catholic Church. Here's the thing. The tone of the letter, it was a 31-page document written to Catholic schools, and it was very loving. It was very kind. It was very gentle, and it was very compassionate. It even opened the possibility for dialogue. But the Catholic Church was just saying in a very kind tone what we've always believed, that gender's not fluid and you can't change your sex. It's biology. It's science. You're born a male or you're born a female.
Yes, it's kind to frame the mere acknowledgement that trans people exist and are deserving of respect and support in school as an educational crisis. It's kind to pretend that the existence of trans people, which has been culturally significant since the late Paleolithic, so for at least 10,000 years, is a result of some modern conspiratorial ideology. It's kind to trivialize the rights and well-being of trans people along with various other groups. It's kind to present trans people as unnatural. It's kind to reduce a serious psychological component, gender dysphoria, down to momentary desires. It's kind to blame medically assisted pregnancy, something used by both same-gender and opposite-gender couples, for various perceived social ills. It's kind to once again set about erasing the findings of global anthropology, forwarding its replacement with so-called Christian anthropology, perpetuating colonial violence. It's kind and caring to demand people effectively be tortured, either into death or into hiding, as has been the Christian method for thousands of years. If that's your definition of kind and caring, well, that shows a lot about you as a person. I mean, what's up with people believing that if you say something in a certain tone, that stops their bigotry from being bigotry? It doesn't. You don't get to present the existence of trans people as a threat, as a crisis, only to turn around and claim you're being loving and kind. That's a bold-faced lie. As for opening a dialogue, do you want to know why groups such as the Catholic Church are so desperate to claim that all they want to do is open a dialogue? Well, it's because science has already concluded that discussion. It has reached an evidence-based consensus on the matter. Christianity fucked around with our lives for years, actively seeking to harm us. In the meantime, science has demonstrated the facts that trans people exist and that their gender cannot be changed by human interference, that attempts to do so are akin to torture. This is a fact agreed upon by the UK Council for Psychotherapy, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American Medical Association, and the US Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, to name a few. That's actual science supplied with references you yourself can go and check out. Unlike you, I don't merely say the word science as if that is science. Though I do find it funny when Christians attempt to fall back on science, considering how said investigative method invalidates their entire belief system, from the very origins of the universe down to their role-played cannibalism.
And we'll talk about this more in my next video, which we're going to get into a lot more detail, that many people think that you can choose your sex or gender, and they think that you can choose to be a man or a woman based on the day or how you feel or how you identify. I mean, basically, however you identify as a person, well, that's your truth. What you're born with, that's not truth. It's what you personally identify with in here, even if it's different than out here.
I would say it's amazing how backwards both you and the Catholic Church get this subject, but the truth is I've long come to expect it. Nobody is saying anyone can choose their gender. That is, of course, except for the people who want to try and torture trans people into choosing to be cisgender, i.e. identifying with a gender they were incorrectly assigned at birth. So people like yourself. I am gender fluid. My gender fluctuates between male, female, and androgynous. I have zero control over said fluctuations, yet I still suffer from gender dysphoria. Now, think about that and what it means for me. It means that no matter what I do, whether I decide to have confirmation surgery or not, I will likely never have a body I'm happy with, 100% of the time, dysphoria-wise. The best thing I've found is to aim for androgynous and work from there. Selecting a single gender to stick with, especially my assigned gender, would be far more convenient for my day-to-day life. Just like selecting not to be bisexual would be far more convenient in a heteronormative society. I wouldn't have to suffer the constant abuse, both from others and myself, over my mere existence. Now you point to the head and talk about what you personally identify as in here, in opposition to what you were born with. This reveals a non-existent understanding of human psychology. You are born with a brain, and that brain will develop in certain ways under specific conditions. Trans people develop an understanding of their own gender, just like cis people. The difference is they realize that they were assigned the wrong gender at birth. I should note that researchers found key differences between trans children and children who are simply exploring their interests. One such difference is the fact that a trans child will refuse to be associated with anything other than their gender identity. Now, it's already been established that we as people cannot change a person's gender, and that attempts to do so are harmful. So, where does that leave us in regards to sex and gender? Well, sex refers to a series of physical traits, typically chromosomes, hormones, gametes, external genitalia, and internal reproductive organs. However, this list is often subject to additions and subtractions. For example, hormones can be further split into hormone production and hormone usage, since people with androgen insensitivity syndrome produce as much testosterone as cis men, they just can't use it. Another component we can, and I would argue should include into sex, is gender, the psychological element of sex, the sex of the brain. After all, the brain is a purely physical part of the body, with science never having demonstrated some supernatural element. Therefore, its inclusion in sex is not a ridiculous sentiment. Interestingly enough, the Indian Supreme Court seems to agree with me on this. I noticed the following statement as I was making my previous video on India's Transgender Persons Protection of Rights Bill. The Supreme Court ruled that, quote, "Gender identity, in our view, is an integral part of sex and no citizen can be discriminated on the grounds of gender identity, including those who identify as third gender." End quote. Note that I'm not bringing this out as an argument from authority. I'm merely noting something I had wanted to point out in that video, but there were more important matters to attend to. India is of course one of the cultures which has a long and colourful history of trans people, most notably as part of the Hijra communities. Just to clarify, this is not the perspective shared by all trans people, since we're not some religion or hive mind. This is merely the conclusion I and others have reached with the application of evidence-based reasoning when it comes to the existence of trans people and the attempts to change them. I view gender as a psychological component of sex, others view it as a performative identity. Returning to the Hijra community, during the colonial period of India, the British invaders first gathered data on the various tribes and castes found throughout India, including the Hijra community. The British then used this information to class the Hijra community as a criminal caste, first implementing said policies in the northwest of the country before applying these laws elsewhere with the 27th Criminal Tribes Act. Said act required every member of the Hijra community to register their existence for surveillance. It also gave the police the right to arrest people who, quote, "appear dressed or ornamented like a woman in public street or place, or in any other place with intention of being seen from public street or place," end quote. All of which was done with the intention of eradicating indigenous culture whilst imposing Christian ideas of morality, something which thankfully failed. The Hijra community became a symbol of anti-colonial resistance and has survived to this day. And whilst things are not exactly perfect for them here, they fared much better than some of the other communities we'll look into later, with a specific relation to the Catholic Church.
But of course this isn't true, and it leads to a whole host of problems. I mean, there was one man who thought he was a woman, and so he had a sex change and became a woman. But then he was confused again and became a man again, and then became a woman again, and he changed several times from man to woman. That's not transgender, that's confusion. There was another man too, John Copland, who actually changed his sex 3 times. And of course, we know a man who actually changed his sex 167 times. He went in for 167 sex change surgeries.
Except that's not true. Blair Lawson did not receive gender confirmation 167 times. That would be physically impossible considering the months or even years of preparation required, not to mention the time for healing after operations. They received a total of 3 times. So where did the 167 number come from? Individual surgeries. A trans woman may go in for an operation and have surgery on her brow, her nose, her jaw, her throat, her shoulders, her chest, her hips, her buttocks, and so on and so forth. Each one is classed as a separate surgery. What's more is some things can't be achieved for a single surgery, therefore require additional surgeries over a period of time. So the way you present this as, quote, "Of course, we know a man who actually changed his sex 167 times, end quote, is thoroughly dishonest. Now, I say dishonest since you claim to know this, suggesting you've actually put some research into the subject. So you're either lying about what happened, or you're lying about having researched what happened. Now, does transition regret exist? Yes. Is it incredibly rare, to the point that only a handful of examples can ever be presented? You better believe it. What's more is that the word regret doesn't always mean what it's presented as being here. It doesn't always mean that a person transitions and then declares that they're not transgender. It often means that they overestimated what said surgeries could achieve. That's why so many continue to present as the gender they were confirmed as. As for how they overestimated what the surgery can achieve, many trans people have been led to believe that gender confirmation will do away with transphobic abuse, that they'll be accepted as a gender they are confirmed as by wider society. Sadly, that's not the case, especially when it comes to religious and conservative households. This can result in trans people regretting the act of coming out of the closet to receive gender confirmation surgery. They can become pulled between being true to themselves and attempting to remain part of the family that rejects an aspect of them that they can no longer hide. They're constantly suffering abuse from wider society and their family, making them wish they could go back in the closet. And some attempt to do that only to find out that their gender dysphoria hasn't gone away, resulting in an endless spiral of having to come out and try to change things and being forced back into the closet, which is tragic, but it's the result of transphobia, not some mythic trans ideology.
But it's out of control. We have everything in between. We have men who think they're 6-year-olds because their minds are lying to them and telling them that they're 6 years old. And they believe that. And so they go to have sex reassignment surgery to become a girl, to feel like a girl, to look like a little 6-year-old girl. But this is a grown man. He's not a 6-year-old. You can't change your sex and you can't change your age. I can't change who I am. I can't pretend that I'm 80. I can't pretend that I'm 10. Even if I think I am, it's not true. It is not true. And the fact that we lie to these people, it's not helping them and it's actually hurting them. I mean, on the extreme side, you have people identifying as a cat or a dog or a reptile. I mean, one man went in for surgery to become a reptile and get scales because he really thought he was.
None of which has any relevance or bearing to the discussion surrounding transgender people. Gender isn't a measurement of time or something not observed in the human species. Gender is a psychological component of sex, and just like other components of sex, need not be dimorphic or aligned with said other traits. It's not black and white, and a person can have a mix of said characteristics which we wouldn't typically expect to find in a person. This is simply a rehash of the tired-old argument that allowing people of the same gender to love one another openly will result in paedophilia or bestiality. In order to make that argument, a person has to ignore the evidence and understanding available to us through both science and ethics. With same-gender attraction, they ignore the presence of informed consent, and with this, they ignore the scientific consensus on trans people. Why? Well, because it does not fit their religious narrative. In fact, it refutes it.
The Catholic Church actually cares for transgender people. It actually cares and wants to help these people, or whatever other disassociation psychological issues that they're facing. But it's the other activists and the political activists and the gay activists that don't care for these people. They're telling them, oh, you think you're a reptile? That's okay. Be a reptile. You think you're a 6-year-old girl? That's okay. Be a 6-year-old girl. But that's damaging, it's confusing, and it's not helping the people or their situation. It's not making them better.
Except that's a lie, at least it's stated by anyone who actually has knowledge on the subject. The support trans people receive, not these other groups you are dishonestly conflating with trans people, has a measurable impact on their well-being. Young trans people have incredibly high rates of attempted suicide. Some studies find that attempted suicide to be as high as 1 in 2. And yet the rates of depression and anxiety responsible for that attempted suicide, they drop down to levels equal to that of cis teens if they're accepted and have their chosen name and pronouns used by friends and family. Cis or cisgender being those who identify with their birth-assigned gender, the opposite of transgender, if you will. Likewise, a US study comparing the impact of growing up in a supportive versus rejective household found that LGBT+ individuals from households who rejected them on the basis of being LGBT+ were, quote, more than 8 times as likely to have attempted suicide, nearly 6 times as likely to report high levels of depression, more than 3 times as likely to use illegal drugs, and more than 3 times as likely to be at high risk for HIV and sexually transmitted diseases. End quote. That is the cost of your bigotry. Now you might say that what you're forwarding isn't bigotry. You don't want to use conversion therapy. You just want to convince trans and indeed all LGBT+ people that they're really wrong. Well, a 2019 study by the Trevor Project showed us exactly what happens when people like you attempt to convince LGBT+ people to change. The rates of attempted suicide when comparing LGBT+ youth who've never experienced attempts to convince them to change their identity to those who have more than doubled from 8% to 23%. Again, this is simply attempts to convince them to change their gender or sexuality. It more than doubles their rates of attempted suicide. That's the very opposite of care. But moving on to the historic perspective, how has the Catholic Church and its followers treated trans people throughout history? Well, when the Spanish arrived in the New World and found trans priestesses, they began to publicly execute them through one of 3 methods: strike of the sword, burnt at the stake, or torn apart by dogs. This was all done with the intention of eradicating indigenous culture, bringing it in line with Christian ideals, this time specifically Catholic ideals, with the Catholic Church's blessing. You outright slaughtered us when you could, and now that you can't, you seek to drive us to take our own lives. These are the demonstrable facts, so I hope you choke on the assertion that the, quote, Catholic Church actually cares for transgender people, end quote. We know exactly what your notions of care entail. We don't need nor want your care. We need you to back the fuck off and leave us and all LGBT+ people well and truly alone. And until you do so, we are going to keep pointing out the damage that the misinformation you are propagating is causing us.
Another thing that set these activists off was that the church mentioned in their document the importance of family, the need for a mother and a father. And it quoted the Bible, of course, because we're Catholic, but it talked about how God made them male and female. God made humans, male and female. He made sex, he made gender. That's how it is. Science says it told us that forever. The Catholic Church is concerned that the family unit is breaking down and talked about the complementarity that only a mother and a father can give, a male and a female. So there's certain qualities, because men and women are different, there's certain qualities that only a man can give. And there's certain feminine qualities that only a woman can give. Even if you have 2 wonderful men trying to raise you, they could never take the place of a mother. And even if you have 2 wonderful women trying to raise you, no matter how masculine one of them is, they can never take the place of a daddy. They can never take the place of a father, a man, someone masculine in your life. And there have been many, many homosexual kids and non-homosexual kids who have spoken out against homosexual marriage because they've been the product of having 2 moms and 2 dads. And they've grown up saying that I don't know what it's like to have a daddy. My moms were wonderful, but I don't know what it's like to have a daddy, to have a father, to grow up with that, and vice versa. I mean, if you want to read a book called Out From Under, it's the story of Don Stefanowitz, who grew up with a homosexual father and watched his orgies and his homosexual lifestyle and grew up with great confusion. And a lot of people have spoken out on this topic because we need a mother and a father. Each give qualities that makes a child healthy and makes a child whole. We need both.
You really need to stop mentioning science when it actively refutes every assertion you've just made. Adoption by same-gender parents is one of the most studied aspects of LGBT+ existence. In 2017, Cornell University did a meta-analysis, an analysis drawing on all available evidence, in this case 79 individual studies and papers on same-gender parenting. What they found was damning to your narrative. Out of these 79 papers, 75 of them clearly demonstrated that children raised in same-gender households had equal or greater well-being than that of children raised in opposite-gender households. What's more is that when they looked into the studies that found them to have a lesser well-being than children raised by opposite-gender couples, they found a common theme. What they found was that none of these papers had accounted for extraneous variables, that is, things outside of what the researcher seeks to measure, in this case the gender composition of the parents and the impacts it has on the children, being measured. This renders said results invalid. Allow me to explain. Say I wanted to measure how much light was given off by different brands of light bulb. I couldn't just measure the amount of light present when the bulb is on whilst standing outside in the middle of a field. Why not? Well, because background light, such as from the sun, the stars, the moon, nearby streetlights, would impact my results. If I measured one brand at noon, that brand would receive an unfair advantage over a brand measured at, say, midnight due to the position of the sun and the amount of extraneous light. That extra light is an extraneous variable. So I'd have to do the experiment inside in a controlled condition with no extraneous light to impact my results. Now, of course, when it comes to real life, this is difficult. We can't just kidnap 50 opposite gender couples and 50 same gender couples, give them children and monitor them on an island. So one of the things we carry out in research is a matched sample. This is where we take a large natural sample and match couples suitable for comparison. So we don't compare, for example, a black working class couple from America to a white upper class couple in Norway. Instead, we compare like for like all the way down to the detail we actually seek to measure, which is the gender composition of said parental couple. That way we know what we are measuring is the result of that trait, that quality. And when we do that, when comparing same-gender couples to opposite-gender couples, the consensus is definitive. There is no intrinsic negative impact that results from being raised by a same-gender couple. What we do find is that discrimination against same-gender couples, like that you support, harms the children. So if you really cared about the children, you'd be fighting to end discrimination against gay and bisexual people. You won't, however, since you're not actually concerned about the children any more than you are the science. That's why you support an institution which actively harbours child rapists, moving them from place to place to try and keep them away from justice.
So the Catholic Church was not slamming transgender people. It was not putting them down. It was not looking down on them in any way. It wasn't even stating anything new. We've just reaffirmed everything we've always believed for 2,000 years and that God followers have believed since the beginning of dawn, since the beginning of humanity, that God is the author of life. God is the author of marriage, and he made marriage between one man and one woman, and also piggybacking on that, saying that there's no such thing as transgender or being gender fluid or anything else. And again, I'm going to be talking about that in my next video, so if that's something that interests you, I'm going to be showing why transgender just isn't real. It's just not. And I'm going to be giving a lot of facts, and it's going to be super juicy. So check back in a day or two because we are going to be hitting that topic very soon.
The Catholic Church was promoting misinformation with the intent to harm both the trans community and same-gender parents, also harming their children in the process. So it claims that this wasn't the Catholic Church slamming or putting trans people down. It's about as honest as everything else in your video, which is to say, not at all. The Catholic Church continues to be a vile, unethical institution which seeks to destroy the lives of millions around the globe, and you continue to support it in spite of knowing all this. I know you know through the facts that you have to work so hard to misframe the entire subject, all whilst throwing the word science out there like it actually supports your nonsense. Now you claim that your next video will be filled with facts. But seeing how this video did no such thing and the next video has no references to support what you say, I very much doubt that. But there's only one way to find out. So do be sure to join me next time as I continue to take this dishonest little man's religiously motivated bigotry to pieces. As always, please check out our other videos. You can also support us and support via Patreon, and in doing so, help us become ad-free. We'd just like to say a big thank you to everyone who's given to the channel, giving a special thanks to the following people: Hannah Banghart, Matthew Kovac, McGay, Amit Devojny, Erica Ann James, Daniel Martinez, Steve Corbin, Sam Braxton, Caitlin Smart, Wellington Marcus, and Atlas5. And for myself and Adita, take care now.